Somewhere, deep within your organization, there are people that need your help. They might be squirreled away on the 6th floor of a darkened office somewhere. They might be in Dublin. They might be in Bangalore. They might even be sitting 6 blocks away from here, the Crystal Ballroom. And they're having conversations. These folks are experiencing where your products or platform or service is really used, where the rubber hits the road. I'm talking, of course, about your support team, and they're having conversations. Over the phone, over chat, and over email. And they are very, very bored. My name is Matthew Buttler, and I want to talk to you about the symbiotic relationship between documentation and support. Mostly, I'm here today to ask you to help. I want you to help by offering the means to have only interesting conversations. OIC. First, a little about myself. I'm from Ottawa, Ontario, which is the capital of Canada, which explains why I've got such a strange accent. I'm a technical writer and web developer at a company called SpeedyRails. It's a cloud hosting company with data centers in exotic locations like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. I've been a documentarian for a few years now. I'm one of those English lit students who learned how to pay his bills through tech writing. Shout out to my lit nerds out there. In my career, I worked for a few different organizations, each with its own unique set of challenges and interesting conversations. A long while back, I worked for Shopify in the Wild West days. Hi, friends. I know you're out there. I did some work for Adobe, where I focused primarily on auditing and correcting internal documentation. I also picked up a couple other few gigs here and there, like adding content to doing web development on some WordPress sites. And this time last year, I was actually on a short contract doing developer-oriented tutorials for Microsoft. I find myself mostly working with startups, though, and small companies who are in the push to get to market, or to further their market share. In order to get to market or expand their share, they'd parachute in a writer like me to add self-help for onboarding new users or fixing other sticky situations. I found a very good fit in a combination role, product documentation and web development, which is what I do now, as I said, at SpeedyRails, which I also said was a great cloud hosting company. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm also the lead organizer of Write the Docs Ottawa, a grouping of Ottawa documentarians. We are engineers turned writers, fresh graduates from tech writing programs, and yes, even some STCers. We meet every month at a pub to sip cold suds or soda and swap war stories or talk about the wide world of tech writing. And it is a wide world. Though the range of companies I've worked for are mostly in high tech, with a few exceptions, everyone I talk to about this, they all have their own similar stories from customer-facing roles of all stripes. I'm sick of telling people about this thing. I'm sick of talking about onboarding, or account payment, or password resets. You know, boring conversations. I know of this firsthand. It may not surprise you to learn that I used to be one of these support agents. I was, one of the entry-level folks talking about your product. There was a time in my previous life where I, too, was one of the many phone jockeys who wanted nothing more to put into their 8 hours or 70 phone calls and found myself having the same conversations over and over again. Like, you have to set your A record to our IP 192.168 dot, like the period beside your question mark key? Yeah, that one. Just click in your settings, click on the account billing, and click into the credit card field and add it there. No problem. Click the forgot password link. No, not that one. The one that says forgot password. Yeah, that's the one, yeah. You know what, I'll just send you a link. And every day, my colleagues and I waited for that last call, last chat, that last email in the queue, and hang up or click resolve, exhale deeply, and desperately wish there was an easier way to work with these users. And I'd open up a fresh can of Canada Dry Club soda, and I'd think about ways to make things better for everyone, to have instead of these boring conversations, of a time when I would have only interesting conversations. Oh, I see. I'm going to tell you about a specific boring problem that I faced many, many, many times. So way back before I was writing documentation for a living, I would often encounter this domain problem. This is something I found the most boring, and so it's near and dear to my heart. This task seems simple enough to the developers. The workflow is straightforward. Apply a custom domain to your account with the software thing. So let's close our eyes for a moment and just imagine, if you will, that you're sitting in a nice ergonomic chair in front of a very large computer screen, and your headset starts to ring. And you pick up the call, and like I said, the user wants to add their custom domain to their website. They want to use this domain because they've been using it for like 18 months to build some hype, and they bought the domain name last year from a third party because it was on sale, and they want to link it to their site they've just built or their application they finished developing for an online pizza delivery service. So you think to yourself, great, fantastic, you know, it's not too difficult, but to normal people, users, in the pizza delivery racket especially, it's one of the most technical things they're ever going to have to do. The problem here, of course, is, like I said, the domains are third party. And while I could name names, I won't. Some domain hosts are complicated. There's added friction for the user, too, because it's not directly under the umbrella of the platform that you're paid to support as a support agent. And often the domain provider is trying to upsell some hosting space or aggressive branding something, or they just don't provide a clear knowledge base article about how to do this thing they need to do. So, being resourceful, I picked up a few domain names from the popular providers, and I learned as much as I could about this very common task. One by one, I navigated dark corners of DNS controls, and after some time, I had the rare, coveted knowledge of how to solve the problem, but it was still leading to boring conversations. Click My Domains, click Edit Zone. Yep, that's the third line there. Click the green tab. Okay, now you should see a page called Edit Zones. Go in there and edit your DNS. You kind of get the idea. The gap, well, I had it filled in my case, still existed, though. The boring conversations were still happening across the department, and this knowledge gap was eating up valuable conversation time. And it's still 30% of my day, and everyone was coming to me for expert opinion on domains. So I got to work documenting these domains, and wouldn't you know it, it really pays to have this stuff written down. It pays to be able to provide people with direct links to help people solve their own problems. And now that we had it written down, the conversations started to become less frequent. The gap had been largely filled in. A lot of people could look it up in our knowledge base because it was clearly marked, and the conversations we're still having about domains, yeah, they still existed, but it usually led to a more valuable call. Like, you'd say something like, oh, you bought a domain on GoDaddy? Yeah, sure, let me send you our documentation. It's got screenshots, it'll take you through the process from start to finish. Is there anything else I can help you out with today? And then an actual problem might arise. Well, yeah, actually, I'm having this complex problem that I'm not too sure about. Can you help me with that? Conversation was interesting. Oh, I see. Conversations became more in-depth, more worthwhile, and the support team became more robust, more versatile, able to broaden their knowledge beyond the simple ABC. The team was evolving and becoming more adaptable to handle interesting problems, having interesting conversations. Only interesting conversations. Oh, I see. Documentation started acting as a toolkit, providing as a means to stop the same question from coming up over and over and over again. And now we have a standard solution for it, and so support became more oriented towards asking customers to just read the docs. And the trust started to build. There were strong docs, and so I started to notice that the relationship was symbiotic. We were experiencing symbiosis. Now, what is symbiosis? Well, as a dictionary definition, because that's the kind of guy I am, English lit nerd, it's an interaction between two different organisms living in close physical association, typically to the advantage of both. Think about those birds you see in nature documentaries that hang out around rivers and pools, who land on large animals and pick the insects off of them. These symbiotic birds, oxpeckers to be specific, they land on a hippopotamus or a zebra or a rhinoceros, and they feed off the insects the animals picked up over the course of the day. I bet if you've ever seen a YouTube clip of a hippopotamus, you probably have at some point, because there's a lot of hours in the day. You probably have seen these birds on a hippo picking the bugs off them. Land on the hippo's back, find the bugs, pick them out, and get fed in the process. It's a great symbiosis. So we have two different kinds of people, documentarians and support agents, working in close physical association to the advantage of both. It happened to be that I was also co-located in the support department, which was pretty handy, as it gave me a ground level view of what was going on around this watering hole. The minor conversations where agent would talk about the boredom and the repetition and the boredom and the repetition. So I started listening and asking questions and seeing how I could help out. I started searching for bugs that were easy to find and easy enough to fix with a little bit of documentation. Oxpeckers can also clean off zebras, rhinos, and wildebeest as well. But I'll get to those animals in a minute. Here we have, on one hand, your support team, lumbering around, wading into unknown waters, and sighing about another phone call about whatever, and TechCom has birds on their back, reducing friction and fixing these pesky problems. And I hear you saying, well, that's all great, it all seems so obvious, but I have other obligations, and I have other things I need to do. I have APIs to document for zebras, I have products to document for rhinos, and I have wild fabrications to make for wildebeests. And I get it, it's tough. But you can make the case for this kind of activity. Let yourself sing the sweet song of success to your boss. Success for your boss, success for us, TechCom, success for support, success for the customer, which is success for your business, which is something everybody's happy about. After some time, I found myself in a different organization, hearing the same complaints about boring conversations. From a different audience, but they were still boring conversations nonetheless. Authentication with one-time passwords is one that sticks out in my memory, as well as stuff like the inconsistencies in dev environments, you know, the old classic, it works on my machine problem. So I became more focused on the patterns that were emerging that were the source of these problems. And so again, I started landing at desks, asking what I could do to help, and filling my beak. This became important as my career continued to evolve, and I kept finding myself in new territory, working at different organizations with entirely different animals, but still hearing the same kinds of problems were happening over and over again. Only this time from, of course, different angles and different animals. So I started categorizing them. What kind of problems? The first one's the classic knowledge gap. And these are day-to-day, boring, repeated questions. It's just a case of filling in the knowledge gap. And these are some of the easiest issues to solve. I mean, they're frequently asked questions. But I would never write an FAQ. I made a promise to myself after I read this question as a so-called frequently asked question. These conversations went something like, hey, I need to know how to configure the VPN so I can do this thing, but there's no doc on it, and I don't want to talk to my manager about it because he's told me like 1,000,000 times. Could you write a doc about this so that I could remember? Yeah, sure, no problem. This was draining time and resources from other employees, and there could have been a guide for it. The next problem I want to talk about is degradation problems and irrelevant or brownfield documentation. These are the, hey, these instructions don't line up with what I'm seeing, but I got to step 6, and I was already configured, so I got scared, and I stopped. These are a bit more complicated. You might need to justify the time you need to amalgamate, centralize, and prune off old docs. And that makes it easier to digest. Then there's the unfindable docs. These are rare, thought to be extinct documents that are now applied in, they're now applied in contexts different from their initial intent. And these ones are pretty tricky, as it often relates to how broken a knowledge base's search tooling is, which usually means diving into the metadata. These are documents that, while searching for the actual thing, you won't find it at all, but if you happen to know the secret word, like monogram, it's the top result. Then there's slow boils. Slow boils are problems that have a really lousy workaround, and they don't really get flagged because it seems to be routine. These are a personal favorite of mine, and this is where you see some real ingenuity come into play from people, where you see like a Rails console open or some weird custom patch that isn't widely distributed applied. Oh, the error message at the bottom of the screen? Yeah, just pull the iPad all the way up and click, yeah, finish. Yeah, you're good. Oh yeah, that feature isn't implemented yet, but let me turn it on for you. In fact, just ignore that screen and just hit go back to classic. These are also cases where developer help is desperately needed, but no one affected seems willing to jump the gap between silos. And that's something really unique to our role. I've heard many conversations about where documentarians belong, and it's often related to the kind of company you work for. Some of us are in engineering, some are in support. But you have to think of it more like a bridging between departments. Often, writing departments are small. In my case, I'm the only one at Speedy Rails, a great cloud hosting company. So we often need to have high mobility. We have to be unintimidated by the developers who have the ability to fix the thing. We have to explain that the Rails console isn't a realistic option and that, by gum, that UI really needs fixing. And I said I was co-located, which is a great advantage to have. And an important part of my view on this was proximity. But the ability to see it from a higher level and track trends and make some friends and allies along the way. Get a few people you trust to be your insiders on the ground who can flag common problems and show up one day and ask to shadow someone just to see what's bugging them. Bring donuts. You're a hero. It's great. From my experience, boring conversations are always a trend that happens. You can probably find a data set about them all, but sometimes they creep up and you don't even think about them. And it's important to remember what we're aiming for here. Only interesting conversations, conversations worth having, OIC. Get the information you need to mitigate the big problems. And I haven't really said this directly, but it does go both ways. You can take your perspective and go find the zebras working on the next big thing, pick their brain for a half hour, and bring the features down to the watering hole. And you can share information with the relevant hippos, or yes, even wildebeest. Share it early and share it often. People love to hear about the next big thing, especially when it's seen as a fix to a slow boil. Support agents especially want to see what's being worked on, and often agents can provide valuable insight on how to make sure the objectives can be met. I found that a lot of the time support staff are really undervalued, even though they're savvy and they know their way around the wilderness. Now, domesticated user testing can give you an idea of how the new feature will look to some customers. It looks good to me, folks will say. But until you see how it works in the wild, you might be overlooking an important issue, like nobody using that button, or it's a bug that affects users with a specific condition that wasn't thought about. Not all animals also have the same understanding as others. So mobilize. Find some different animals to pick at. And 100% of the time, you can come away with something that's really bugging them, like out-of-date mobile docs or out-of-date screenshots for GoDaddy, or like, what the heck does this microcopy mean? These are the things that need fixing, and it really helps no matter how small the change might seem to be. It builds trust, not just trust in you, but also for your product. And remember, be like a bird. Come in from that high level and see what's up. But how can you tell if you're making a difference, though? I mean, some people don't notice birds. If we do our work correctly, it should be pretty seamless, right? And we've talked about measuring the impact of documentations and documentarian interventions in support here on the stage before. There are many metrics you can point to that indicate success. Shorter support interactions, more hits on your knowledge center, and a good ratings from the feedback mechanism you might have, more time spent on articles, and fewer repeat callers. Things look good. They appear to be good. But there's a problem with these measurements. It takes time to run metrics, and listening into every call is kind of a waste of time, and you're ignoring the other animals you have to report to. And it's hard to get a sense of whether or not you're really making an impact. Sometimes you got to read the emails to know what's up, and you got to see the chats and see how they're going. And an interesting conversation inherently leads to a stronger or longer support interaction. And asking people all the time what their problems are gets pretty boring too. And whenever possible, we're looking to have only interesting conversations. OIC. So really what you're looking at is a lot less measurable than that. It could mean bad things too. Short calls can also be boring. Fewer repeats might indicate churn. People dropping your platform because they kind of hate it. More hits doesn't necessarily mean more value to your customer. And even though we encourage it, not many people leave worthwhile feedback on our knowledge bases. People could just leave the KB article open in their browser while they cycle through Facebook and Twitter endlessly. And people might not know what you do there or what you can do for them in particular. I'm not telling you to fix everything and run yourself into the ground. It's frequently little things that need a little attention, and this little push can just lead to really great things, just a little bit of effort. And I respect that you have other things to do too. What you're really trying to build here is trust. Trust between your customers and your support agents to get accurate, complete, concise knowledge quickly ideally making your customers bolder and trusting themselves and saying, I don't need to get on the phone to solve this, I can figure this out myself. But it's also trust between your support team and you. You're someone outside of the rank and file that has their back, and you're driving home the point that you're a good person who cares about the support department. And I can't say this enough. Trust is really the cornerstone here. It feels nice to know that someone is looking out for you and that trust is what makes it so good. We're here to empower our audience to have only interesting conversations. Oh, I see. And there's one point, again, that I can just drive home here before the end of the first day of Write the Docs. It's that our job isn't just merely to document products, APIs, blenders, or beehives. It's also to build trust with our users, confidence in our agents, and empower everyone we can so they too can say to themselves, oh, I see. Thanks, guys.